A racist white woman is rushed into the emergency room, barely clinging to life. The doctors move swiftly, working against the clock to save her. Hours pass, and finally, her life is pulled back from the edge by the skilled hands of a surgeon. But when she opens her eyes, she's not relieved. Instead, fury fills her face as she sees the doctor standing over her, a black man who has just saved her life. Outrage replaces gratitude, and an ugly hostility takes hold. What follows is a confrontation of prejudice, strength, and an unbreakable resolve that neither of them saw coming. Stay tuned to find out how one man's courage in the face of hatred turns this story of division into a legacy of resilience. Linda Walsh, a 56-year-old white woman, was rushed into the emergency room on a night when the storm raged outside, adding urgency to the wails of the ambulance sirens. Dr. Caleb Johnson, a highly skilled and experienced black surgeon, was paged immediately. This case was anything but routine. Linda's condition was critical, her life balancing on the edge after she suddenly collapsed at home. Caleb understood that every decision, every movement would weigh heavily on her survival. Without hesitation, Caleb scrubbed in, gloved his hands, and tied the strings of his surgical gown, ready to step into a battle for Linda's life. Moments like these required absolute focus. Caleb knew he couldn't allow distractions to invade his thoughts. Years of intense medical training honed not just his technical skills, but also his capacity to handle unimaginable pressure. He was ready, but he couldn't deny the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Time seemed to slow as Caleb performed each task, dedicating all of his skill and presence to each crucial step of the surgery. The steady beeping of the monitors guided him, echoing each breath Linda took, while his hands worked precisely and steadily, knowing each cut, each stitch would determine her fate. He examined each artery and each tissue, meticulously repairing the damage with precision. Slowly, Caleb managed to pull Linda back from the edge, one heartbeat at a time. As the surgery finally concluded, Caleb quietly removed his gloves, his eyes weary but relieved. The wall clock indicated that hours had passed, more than he'd anticipated. It had been a long, grueling procedure, but Linda was stable. Her heart was beating strong and her vitals were normalizing. To everyone present, it was a job well done, a true medical victory. But to Caleb, it was simply fulfilling his duty, a responsibility he carried with utmost commitment, even amid fatigue and tension. But when Linda finally woke up in the recovery room, she was greeted by an unexpected sight, one that, for her, brought neither relief nor gratitude. Her weary, angry eyes fixed on Caleb as he stepped into the room. Instead of seeing him as her savior, her gaze filled with indignation and mistrust. "Who are you?" Linda demanded, her voice laced with suspicion and resentment. "I want to speak to the real doctor, not you." Caleb, who had faced resistance and doubt before, still felt a pang at the familiar sting of prejudice. It was a response he knew all too well, a look that only saw his skin and not the care he'd poured into saving her life. Still, he met her hostility with calm professionalism. "Ms. Walsh, I'm the surgeon who performed your operation. Your condition was critical, but the procedure went well. You're now stable and on the path to recovery." But Linda's face hardened, her lips pressed into a tight, unyielding line. She barely listened, her mind already set against him. "You call this stable?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing as she motioned toward the bandages covering her abdomen. "I've never felt worse in my life. What did you do to me?" Caleb glanced at her chart, noting that all her vitals were strong, and that, according to every indicator, the surgery had been a success. He kept his voice even as he responded. "Miss Nath Walsh, I assure you the operation went smoothly. Your body just needs time to recover, and I'll be here to monitor your progress every step of the way." But she sneered, turning her face away, refusing to acknowledge his words. All she saw was someone different, someone unfamiliar. It didn't matter to her that he had been the one who fought for her life, keeping her from the brink of death. To Linda, Caleb was merely a target, a face she didn't trust, someone she didn't believe deserved to be her doctor. Without a moment's hesitation, she demanded to see the hospital director, insisting that she needed someone else to take over her care. Caleb felt a familiar weight settle on him, knowing this wouldn't be the last time he'd encounter such hostility. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to facing these moments, knowing that some patients couldn't see beyond their own biases, no matter what he'd done for them. Yet, even now, that reality never failed to sting. As Caleb left Linda's room, a heavy weight settled on his chest. He'd encountered patients like her before, ones who couldn't see past their preconceptions. He had braced himself for moments like these since he first put on his medical coat, but the sting of rejection never truly faded. No matter his skill, no matter the years of training and sacrifice, some people only saw one thing when they looked at him. Making his way to the nurse's station, he was greeted by a young nurse, Megan, who'd assisted him during Linda's surgery. She noticed the tension in his face and offered a sympathetic look. "Rough encounter?" she asked gently, already seeming to understand. Caleb nodded, maintaining his calm demeanor. "Miss Walsh isn't thrilled to see me as her doctor," he said, choosing his words carefully. He knew there was little point in discussing the prejudice openly. It was a reality he had faced countless times. Megan frowned slightly, then sighed. "Some people, they just don't get it, do they?" She paused, her expression softening as she added, "I hope you know that we see you for who you are, Dr. Johnson. You've saved lives here, and we all know the incredible doctor you are." Caleb appreciated her words more than he could express. A small smile crossed his lips as he nodded. "Thanks, Megan. It means a lot," he said. But despite her kind words, he knew he would still have to face Linda's complaints and hostility throughout her stay. Her recovery would be long, and he would be her primary physician the entire time. It would take all of his professional strength to see it through. Not long after, his pager buzzed again. It was Linda. She had been calling for him incessantly, demanding that someone else oversee her care. Caleb took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. He'd trained himself to maintain composure in these situations, to rise above. But even with all his preparation, it wasn't easy. As he walked back to her room, he mentally rehearsed the facts of her case, focusing solely on her medical needs. He reminded himself why he was here, to provide care, to help patients heal. Stepping into her room, he saw Linda's face harden once more as her eyes met his. She barely masked her disgust, her expression twisted with frustration. "Are you back again?" she sneered, her tone biting. "I told you I wanted another doctor. Why can't you listen?" Caleb approached her bed with a steady professionalism, keeping his expression neutral. "Miss Walsh, I am your attending physician. My role is to ensure you receive the best care possible throughout your recovery. I performed your surgery, and I'll be here to monitor your progress." He kept his voice calm, not wanting to fuel her anger. She rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath. "Best care," she scoffed. "That's easy for you to say. I feel worse than I ever have." She motioned to the bandages on her abdomen. "You call this progress?" Caleb held her gaze steadily, showing no reaction to her tone. "Miss Walsh, post-surgical discomfort is normal. Your body is healing, and some pain is part of that process. But from what I can see, everything is progressing well." Linda's eyes narrowed, a harshness gleaming in them. "Oh, I know what this is," she said, her voice rising with hostility. "People like you think you can get away with anything. You expect me to believe you? I want someone who knows what they're doing. I'm not here to be anyone's charity case." Her words hung in the air, venomous and accusatory. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he refused to let her words provoke him. He'd heard such accusations before, but no matter how often it happened, it never grew easier to bear. He replied, his voice unwavering. "If you'd like a second opinion, Miss Walsh, I can arrange it. My only goal is to ensure your full recovery." She crossed her arms, staring him down. "Good," she replied sharply. "Because I'll be talking to the hospital director about this. I want someone qualified, someone who actually knows what they're doing." Caleb nodded, unfazed. "I'll inform the director of your request," he said quietly, then turned to leave, feeling the familiar pang of frustration settle in his chest. He knew he had provided the best possible care. He'd done everything by the book. Yet in Linda's eyes, that didn't matter. As he walked down the hallway, he felt the weight of her words pressing on him. This was not the first time he'd encountered this type of hostility, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. Rising above these moments had become second nature, but that didn't dull the pain of knowing that to some people, his competence and kindness were always in question. Caleb sighed, steeling himself for the days to come. Linda Walsh's recovery would be challenging, and her accusations, though baseless, had the potential to cause him more trouble than she realized. In the quiet of his office, Caleb removed his surgical cap and leaned against the counter, taking a moment to center himself. The day had just begun, but Linda's accusations had already weighed heavily on him. He'd faced many difficult patients, but her open hostility was different, sharper, and more personal. What would it take for Caleb to break? How much hostility could one person bear before the weight became too much? Just as he closed his eyes to take a deep breath, a knock on the door broke his brief moment of peace. It was Dr. Karen Holloway, the hospital director, with a concerned look on her face. Word about Linda's complaints had spread quickly, and Dr. Holloway was well aware of the situation. She stepped into his office, folding her arms as she studied him with a knowing expression. "I just heard from Miss Walsh," she began gently. "She's demanding to speak with the director." Dr. Holloway sighed. "She insists there's something wrong with her care and wants you removed from her case." Caleb forced a calm nod, though he felt the familiar tightness returning to his chest. "I understand," he replied, his voice steady. "I know her issues aren't really about the care she's receiving." Dr. Holloway gave a sympathetic nod. "We both know the real reason behind her complaints, and you need to know we have your back, Caleb. We've reviewed your work, and you've done everything right." Relief washed over him as Dr. Holloway's words echoed in the quiet room. Knowing that his team had faith in his abilities gave him the strength to face the growing tension, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. He knew Linda wouldn't stop at a single complaint. Her anger ran deeper than that. "I appreciate it," Caleb said, his tone sincere. "I'll do my best to stay focused and continue providing the best care I can." Dr. Holloway sighed, her expression softening. "You're a great doctor, Caleb, and everyone here knows it. But remember, you don't have to endure this alone. If Miss Walsh crosses the line, we're ready to step in." Caleb nodded, appreciating her support. But as he returned to his rounds, Linda's resentment remained a dark cloud over him, one he couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, he entered Linda's room again, determined to check her progress and provide the professional care she deserved, no matter her attitude. As expected, Linda was already glaring at him, her arms crossed, her face twisted into a bitter scowl. It was clear she was ready for another confrontation. "Back again, are you?" she sneered, her tone filled with disdain. "I thought I told you to stay out of my room." Caleb maintained his professional composure. "Miss Walsh, I'm here to monitor your progress and ensure that your recovery is on track," he said calmly. He glanced over her chart, noting that her vitals were improving steadily. "From what I see, you're healing well." But Linda scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "Healing well?" she spat, her voice rising in anger. "I've been in pain since you touched me. I feel worse than ever, and I know it's because of you." Caleb didn't flinch. He knew the pain she described was typical post-surgical discomfort, and her body was responding well overall. But her mind was fixed on the idea that he was at fault, no matter what he said. "Miss Walsh," he responded gently, "discomfort is a normal part of the recovery process. If you're experiencing pain, I can adjust your medication to help with that." Linda's face twisted further, her voice dripping with contempt. "I don't want your help. People like you think you can get away with anything, don't you?" Taking a steadying breath, Caleb continued, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Walsh, I assure you that your surgery was done with the highest standards of care. My only goal is to see you recover fully." She sneered, leaning back in her bed, her gaze piercing. "I'll make sure everyone knows how incompetent you are. I want to talk to the hospital director and get a real doctor in here." Her accusations hung in the air, harsh and unfounded. Caleb simply nodded, recognizing that nothing he could say would change her mind. "I'll let Dr. Holloway know of your request," he replied, his voice unwavering. "In the meantime, I'll continue checking on your recovery." As he turned to leave, he could feel Linda's gaze burning into his back. He knew this was only the beginning. Her contempt wasn't going to fade. But Caleb was determined to see her through the recovery process, no matter how much she resisted. As he stepped into the hallway, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. Each insult weighed heavily on him, yet he knew he couldn't let her words deter him from his purpose. Bookmark, go back. The following day, as Caleb prepared for his rounds, he noticed a shift in the hospital's atmosphere. Word of Linda's complaints had spread among the staff, and he could feel the silent sympathy from his colleagues. Nurses, doctors, and even a few patients offered small, supportive smiles as he passed by, gestures that did little to ease the weight on his shoulders but reminded him he wasn't entirely alone in this. Could Caleb endure Linda's growing hostility, or would it finally wear him down? At the nurse's station, a senior nurse, Helen, approached him with a sympathetic look. "Dr. Johnson, I heard Miss Walsh is still unhappy," she said, choosing her words carefully. "She's demanding a new doctor, but she's lucky you're the one caring for her. We all know how dedicated you are." Caleb appreciated the support. "Thank you, Helen," he replied, managing a small smile. "But it seems Miss Walsh isn't ready to see it that way." Helen nodded, a hint of frustration in her gaze. "Well, if she only knew what you've done for her, maybe she'd see things differently." She paused before adding, "And just so you know, we're all here for you. Don't let her get to you." But could Caleb truly keep Linda's prejudice from affecting him? Steeling himself, Caleb continued on to Linda's room, prepared for another round of confrontations. As he stepped inside, her scowl was already in place, as though she'd been waiting for him just to unleash her fury. Her eyes flashed with anger as he approached her bedside, her lips curling into a bitter sneer. "You just can't stay away, can you?" she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "I told you I don't want you here." Caleb kept his voice level. "I'm here to check on your recovery, Miss Walsh. Your vitals are improving, and I want to ensure that everything is progressing smoothly." But Linda wasn't listening. She raised a shaking finger, pointing directly at him. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" she said, her tone accusatory. "You're just trying to cover up your mistakes. I know you messed up my surgery, and I won't stop until everyone knows it." Caleb met her gaze, his voice steady but firm. "Miss Walsh, I assure you, your surgery was performed with the highest standards of care. I'm here to support your recovery, nothing more." But Linda only sneered, her face twisted in anger. "Support my recovery?" she laughed bitterly. "You're the reason I'm in this mess. You people think you can do whatever you want." Her words, laced with venom, echoed in the room, but Caleb kept his emotions in check. He'd heard it before, the implication that his skin color made him less capable, less deserving. But he knew reacting wouldn't change her mind. He would only give her what she wanted. Taking a slow breath, Caleb replied, "If you would like a second opinion, Miss Walsh, I can arrange it, but my only intention is to help you recover fully." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Oh, you'll get me a second opinion, all right. I'll see the hospital director about this. I want to make sure you never work here again." Her voice was a hiss, each word carrying an unmistakable malice. Caleb nodded calmly. "I understand. Dr. Holloway is aware of your concerns and will be in touch." Without waiting for her next outburst, he excused himself and left the room, his steps measured but heavy. The accusations had cut deeper than he wanted to admit, and he could feel the frustration brewing inside him. A frustration he worked hard to suppress. Back in his office, Caleb sat alone, allowing himself a rare moment of vulnerability. Linda's words replayed in his mind, accusations he knew were baseless but still stung nonetheless. He closed his eyes, pressing his fingers to his temples, fighting the urge to let bitterness cloud his thoughts. He'd worked tirelessly, not just to earn his position, but to excel, to make a difference. But in that moment of self-reflection, he felt a renewed determination rising within him. He'd faced prejudice before, and each time he had risen above it. He knew his value and his dedication, and he wouldn't let Linda's hatred define his worth. Taking a deep breath, he opened his eyes and prepared to continue his rounds. 2 days passed, and Linda's hostility only seemed to grow stronger. Every nurse who entered her room faced an endless string of complaints and demands. Her voice echoed through the hallways, laced with anger and scorn, each word more venomous than the last. Staff began trading shifts reluctantly whenever her name came up, each of them growing weary under her constant demands and unfiltered resentment. Linda had quickly become known throughout the ward, her presence casting a shadow over the otherwise calm environment. Caleb, however, refused to let her behavior affect his dedication to her care. Each morning he entered her room, bracing himself for the confrontation he knew would come. And each morning, Linda's reaction was as cold as ever. Her face was set in a harsh, unyielding scowl, and she greeted him with a tone that left no room for misunderstanding. "You again," she said one morning, her voice dripping with disdain as Caleb stepped into her room. "Haven't you gotten the message yet? I don't want you anywhere near me." Caleb approached her bedside with his usual steady demeanor. "Miss Walsh, I'm here to check on your progress," he replied calmly, his voice as neutral as he could manage. "Your recovery is going well and you should be discharged in a few days." Linda let out a bitter scoff, throwing her hands in the air dramatically. "Discharged?" she echoed, her voice rising with incredulity. "You think I'm just going to leave here like nothing happened? I feel worse now than when I came in." Caleb glanced over her chart, confirming what he already knew. Her vitals were stable, her incision was healing well, and medically, everything was progressing exactly as it should. He looked back at her, keeping his tone even. "Your discomfort is part of the natural healing process, Ms. Walsh. If you're experiencing pain, I can adjust your medication to make you more comfortable." But Linda shook her head, her eyes blazing with anger. "I don't want your adjustments. How do I know you're not making things worse? I'm sure you messed something up, but you're covering it up because you don't want to admit you failed." Would Caleb finally confront her accusations? Or would he continue to take the high road? Caleb took a slow breath, holding back his frustration. "Miss Walsh, I can assure you that everything was done according to the highest standards. My only goal is to see you recover fully." But she wasn't listening. Her face twisted with contempt as she glared at him, her voice growing louder. "You people think you can do anything you want, don't you?" She spat. "I know exactly what this is. You're just trying to push me out of here, trying to get rid of me." The weight of her words hung in the air, sharp and unrelenting. Caleb felt a pang of frustration, the unfairness of her accusations pressing heavily on him. But he reminded himself that responding in anger wouldn't help either of them. He kept his tone controlled, focusing on the facts. "If there's anything specific you're concerned about, Ms. Walsh, I can address it. But your recovery is progressing as expected, and you're on track to be discharged soon," he said evenly, determined to remain professional despite her hostility. Linda's gaze didn't soften. If anything, it grew colder. "Oh, I'm concerned? All right," she replied, her tone low but filled with malice. "I'm concerned about how someone like you even ended up here. Don't think I won't take this up with the hospital board. I'll make sure you never touch another patient." The impact of her words struck Caleb deeply. He knew she meant them, knew she had every intention of following through on her threats. But instead of letting her get under his skin, he gave a quiet nod. "You're free to speak with the hospital director at any time, Miss Walsh. In the meantime, please let the nurses know if you need anything to make your recovery more comfortable." With that, he turned to leave, not waiting for her response. He knew he couldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing his frustration. He had to remain calm, for his sake and hers. Could Caleb continue to rise above, or would Linda's relentless attacks finally make him snap? As he closed the door behind him, he felt the tension that had built up in his chest begin to ease. But only slightly. Her words, her accusations, they lingered, cutting into him more than he wanted to admit. As Linda escalates her actions, hooks are included to maintain tension and anticipation. The days that followed were a true test of Caleb's patience and resilience. Linda's complaints didn't let up. In fact, they became more intense and more personal. She had taken her complaints beyond just him, involving nearly every department in the hospital. Nurses were bombarded with demands, staff heard her endless accusations, and patients in the neighboring rooms grew uneasy as her voice echoed through the corridors. Could Caleb withstand this escalating hostility, or would Linda finally break him? One afternoon, while Caleb was reviewing another patient's chart at the nurse's station, a nurse approached him with a cautious look. "Dr. Johnson? Miss Walsh is still demanding a different doctor," she said softly. "She's even mentioned wanting to file a complaint." Caleb nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. He'd expected this. He'd known Linda wouldn't stop with just verbal confrontations. She was determined to go further, to see her complaints taken seriously, no matter how unfounded they were. Taking a steadying breath, he prepared himself to visit her room again. He knew every encounter with her would be a test, a moment where he had to decide between defending himself and staying calm. As he entered her room, Linda was already fuming, her eyes fixed on him with a hostility that seemed to burn deeper each day. "You again," she said, her tone cold and dripping with disdain. "Are they refusing to get me another doctor, or are you just too stubborn to leave?" Caleb held her gaze, keeping his voice as steady as he could. "Miss Walsh, as your attending physician, it's my responsibility to ensure your recovery goes smoothly. I'm here to check on your progress." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, I'm sure you think you're doing a fine job," she sneered. "But I know better. I know what's really going on here." She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering as though sharing a secret. "You're trying to get rid of me. I know it. You think you can just toss me aside like some charity case." Her words hit a nerve, but Caleb refused to let her see it. "Ms. Walsh, I assure you, my only concern is your health," he replied evenly. "Your vitals are stable, and you're healing well. If there's anything specific you're feeling, please let me know so I can address it." But she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Stable? I don't feel stable. I feel worse than ever, and it's because of you." She pointed a finger at him, her face twisted with anger. "People like you think you can do whatever you want. Well, I'm not going to let you ruin my life." The weight of her words settled between them, sharp and bitter. Caleb knew he couldn't respond the way he wanted to, couldn't give in to the frustration building inside him. Instead, he replied calmly, "Miss Walsh, if you have concerns about your care, I'll make sure they're addressed. But I want you to know that everything I've done is to help you recover." Her gaze hardened. "Oh, don't think I'll forget this," she muttered. "I've already started the paperwork to file a formal complaint. I'll make sure everyone knows how you failed me." Caleb nodded, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "You're free to file any complaint you feel is necessary," he replied, keeping his voice even. "I'll continue to provide the best care I can for you during your stay." He left the room, feeling her eyes on him as he walked away. Her accusations echoed in his mind, a bitter reminder of the challenges he still faced, not because of his skills or his dedication, but because of her unyielding prejudice. Back at the nurse's station, he took a steadying breath, feeling the support of his colleagues around him. He knew he wasn't alone in this struggle, but he also knew that each accusation, each complaint Linda made, had the potential to impact his career. Later that day, Dr. Holloway found him reviewing his notes in the staff lounge. She approached him quietly, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "Caleb, I've been made aware of Ms. Walsh's actions," she said, choosing her words carefully. "She's lodged a formal complaint and, well, she's threatened to sue." Caleb nodded, though he could feel his frustration rising. "I've done everything by the book, Karen," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of weariness. "Every procedure, every checkup, there's nothing she could sue for." Dr. Holloway placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "We know that, Caleb, and we're with you on this, but I want you to know that even if she takes this to court, we have your back. Don't let her get to you." Caleb offered her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Karen. It means a lot to know I have the support of my team," he replied, feeling a renewed resolve despite the pressure. But he couldn't ignore the feeling that this battle was far from over. Linda had set her sights on him, and it was clear she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. The next morning, as Caleb arrived for his shift, he noticed the tense expressions of his colleagues. The usual camaraderie had shifted. Whispers filled the air as he walked past, and staff members exchanged uneasy glances. It didn't take long to learn why. Linda's accusations had spread beyond the hospital, reaching local news channels and online forums. Somehow, her story had made its way into the public sphere, fueling a narrative of alleged medical negligence and racial bias. Though there was no evidence to back her claims, the mere rumor had sparked attention, and Caleb's name was now out there, tied to Linda's accusations. In the staff lounge, Caleb received a sympathetic look from Megan, one of the nurses who had assisted him during Linda's surgery. "Dr. Johnson, I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said quietly. "We all know how much you care about your patients, and it's unfair that someone like her could make things so difficult." Caleb offered her a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you, Megan. It means a lot to know I have support here. This isn't easy." Throughout the day, Caleb could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Linda's baseless accusations had turned into a public spectacle, and even though he knew he had done nothing wrong, the fear of his reputation being tarnished gnawed at him. Each patient he saw, each conversation with a colleague, it all felt overshadowed by the storm brewing around him. Later that afternoon, as Caleb reviewed a patient's chart at the nurse's station, Dr. Holloway approached him, her face lined with concern. "Caleb, do you have a minute?" she asked, motioning for him to follow her into her office. He nodded, already bracing himself for what she might say. In the privacy of her office, Dr. Holloway took a deep breath. "Caleb, I know this has been incredibly challenging, and I want you to know that we stand with you 100%, she began, her tone sincere. "But with Miss Walsh's allegations gaining attention, the hospital's legal team wants to make sure we're prepared for anything." Caleb understood, though he couldn't hide the frustration that flickered in his eyes. "I've done everything by the book, Karen," he said, his voice steady but strained. "Every step I've taken with her care has been professional and thorough." Dr. Holloway nodded. "I know, Caleb, your record speaks for itself, but you know how these things can go. Even unfounded accusations can cause damage." Could Caleb continue to hold his ground, or would the fear of a lawsuit and public scrutiny finally wear him down? Caleb exhaled, nodding slowly. "Thank you, Karen. I'll cooperate with whatever the legal team needs." But inside, the strain was starting to take its toll. He'd spent years building his career, establishing trust, and providing top-notch care. And now, all of that was in jeopardy because of one patient's relentless anger. As the day drew to a close, Caleb found himself alone in the staff lounge, the dim light casting shadows across the room. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the day's events. The accusations, the public attention, the support from his team, all of it churned in his mind, a turbulent mix of gratitude and frustration. Would Caleb find the strength to rise above, or would the weight of Linda's vendetta break his spirit? Just then, Greg Sanders, the hospital's head of security, entered the lounge, spotting Caleb. He approached quietly, offering a nod of understanding. "Hey, Doc," he greeted. "I just wanted to say, I've seen a lot of patients come through this place, but I've never seen anyone as determined to make trouble as Miss Walsh." Caleb gave a small, weary smile. "Thanks, Greg. I appreciate you looking out for me," he replied. It's been a lot." Greg nodded, crossing his arms as he leaned against the counter. "People like her think they can push their weight around just because they're unhappy. But I know you, Doc. You're one of the best we have here. Don't let her get to you." Caleb took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of resilience. "I won't, Greg," he said, though he could feel the strain beneath his words. It was a promise he was determined to keep, even as Linda's complaints loomed over him like a dark cloud. The next day, as he made his way through his rounds, he couldn't ignore the curious glances from patients and colleagues alike. Every step felt heavier, as if the entire hospital had become a witness to his battle. But despite the weight, Caleb held his head high, refusing to let Linda's unfounded accusations define him. Whatever the coming days held, he knew he would face them with the same determination that had carried him through every challenge before. And while the fight was far from over, Caleb knew he had one thing Linda couldn't take from him: his integrity. A week passed, and the tension in Caleb's life only intensified. The hospital's legal team had begun gathering documentation, medical records, and witness statements to prepare for Linda's lawsuit. Despite the mounting evidence supporting Caleb's professionalism, the looming threat of legal action lingered, a shadow that refused to lift. One morning, as Caleb was reviewing his notes in his office, Dr. Holloway stopped by with a folder in her hands. "Caleb," she said softly, taking a seat across from him. "We've gathered all the records and testimonies. Everything points to your work being flawless, as we both know. But Linda's lawyer is pushing forward. They're insisting there was negligence, even though there's no evidence to back it up. Caleb nodded, keeping his face neutral. I expected this, he replied calmly. But it's still frustrating. I've done everything I could for her, Karen. Her recovery is on track. She's just refusing to see it. Doctor, Holloway nodded sympathy in her gaze. I know, Caleb, and so does everyone here. We all stand behind you. Just know, no matter what happens, we're with you every step of the way. As the day of the initial hearing drew closer, Caleb found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He had faced many challenges, but this, being falsely accused and having his skills and integrity questioned, felt like a different battle altogether. It wasn't just his career at stake, it was his entire reputation, his life's work. In quiet moments, Caleb's mind wandered to thoughts of giving up, of simply walking away. The stress was unlike anything he'd experienced, and he wondered if it would ever end. But each time he thought about quitting, he remembered why he'd chosen this path in the first place. He'd become a doctor to help people, to save lives, no matter the cost. Would Caleb's commitment to his profession be enough to carry him through? Or would he finally reach his breaking point? The day of the preliminary hearing arrived, casting a tense hush over the hospital. Caleb took a deep breath as he walked into the courtroom, flanked by Dr. Holloway and the hospital's legal team. Across the room sat Linda, her expression as hard and bitter as ever, flanked by her lawyer. Linda's accusations were detailed, harsh, and unrelenting. She painted Caleb as negligent and unfit, and even implied that his care was inadequate because of personal biases she claimed he held. It was as if she'd taken every stereotype, every baseless accusation, and twisted it into a narrative designed to ruin him. But as the hospital's legal team began their defense, Caleb felt a renewed sense of hope. They presented his flawless medical record, brought in expert testimonies, and showcased the evidence of Linda's successful recovery. Witnesses, including nurses and fellow doctors, testified to Caleb's unwavering dedication, his meticulous care, and the countless lives he'd saved. Would the court see through Linda's accusations, or would her narrative prove too damaging to overcome? As the day went on, it became clear that Linda's case was filled with holes, built on nothing but her prejudice and unwillingness to accept the truth. The hospital's legal team dismantled her claims one by one, each point weakening her accusations further. By the time the judge called for a recess, Caleb felt the first wave of relief he'd had in weeks. The truth was on his side, and he could see that it was finally shining through. Outside the courtroom, Dr. Holloway placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You did well in there, Caleb. We've got this. Just stay strong a little longer. Caleb managed a grateful smile, the weight of the day's events settling over him. Thank you, Karen. I couldn't have done this without you and the team. As the hearing resumed, Caleb watched as Linda's confidence wavered, her accusations unraveling under the scrutiny of the court. Her lawyer's arguments grew weaker, their foundation crumbling as the hospital's legal team presented indisputable facts. Finally, after hours of testimony and evidence, the judge dismissed Linda's claims as baseless and threw out the case. Relief washed over Caleb, a wave of gratitude and exhaustion mixed with the lingering bitterness of what he'd endured. Had Caleb's ordeal truly ended, or would the scars of Linda's accusations leave a lasting impact on his life and career? Back at the hospital that evening, Caleb sat alone in his office, reflecting on everything that had happened. The legal battle was over, but the emotional toll remained. He knew that Linda's accusations, though dismissed, would stay with him, a reminder of the prejudice he still faced, even in the place where he had dedicated his life's work. Yet, as he sat in the quiet, Caleb felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had survived Linda's relentless pursuit, and he knew now that he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. He would continue doing what he loved, providing care, saving lives, and standing tall in the face of adversity. Bookmark. The next few days at the hospital passed in a strange mix of relief and reflection. The lawsuit was behind him, but Caleb could still feel the echoes of Linda's accusations lingering in his mind. He had faced prejudice in many forms throughout his career, but this had been the most challenging by far. It had tested not just his skills, but his patience, his resolve, and his identity as a doctor. Would Caleb's experience with Linda drive him to a new purpose, or would the scars of the ordeal continue to haunt him? Sitting in his office one evening, Caleb stared out the window at the city lights, contemplating everything he'd endured. He knew that this wouldn't be the last time he'd face prejudice or accusations, but he also knew that he'd come through stronger than ever. This experience had proven to him, once and for all, that his dedication ran deeper than the anger or hatred anyone could throw at him. Just then, there was a knock at his door. Megan, the nurse who had supported him through the ordeal, entered with a smile. "Dr. Johnson, I just wanted to check in on you," she said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "I know it's been a rough few weeks, but I wanted you to know that we're all so proud of you. The way you handled everything, it's inspiring." Caleb felt a weight lift as he listened to her words. "Thank you, Megan," he replied, his tone sincere. "I couldn't have gotten through this without all of you by my side. It means more than I can say." Would Caleb's renewed resolve help him turn this experience into something meaningful for others? Megan hesitated, then added, "You know, a few of us were talking. We think your story could really help others here, especially younger doctors. They look up to you, Dr. Johnson. Maybe sharing your experience could make a difference." Caleb nodded slowly, considering her words. He'd always tried to focus on his work, keeping his personal experiences private. But this time was different. Perhaps Megan was right. Maybe sharing his journey could help others facing the same struggles. "Maybe it's time," he said softly, more to himself than to her. He met Megan's eyes with a sense of purpose. "Maybe I can use this to show others that no matter what people throw at you, the truth and integrity always stand strong." Could Caleb's story of resilience inspire others to rise above adversity, or would the memory of Linda's hatred be too painful to revisit? Over the following weeks, Caleb found himself opening up to colleagues and younger medical professionals about his experience. He shared not just the details of Linda's accusations, but also the strength it took to face them with dignity. Word of his resilience began to spread, and doctors and nurses alike came to him for guidance, finding comfort in his story. One evening, as he was finishing his rounds, a young intern approached him nervously. "Dr. Johnson, I heard about everything you went through. I just wanted to say that your strength really means a lot to people like me. I've faced some challenges, and knowing that you overcame something like this makes me believe I can too." Caleb smiled, placing a reassuring hand on the intern's shoulder. "Thank you. Remember, we all face battles, but how we respond defines who we are. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You've earned your place here." Would Caleb's words of encouragement inspire the next generation, or would they face the same struggles he did? The hospital had returned to its usual rhythm, yet Caleb sensed a new energy, a feeling of solidarity among his colleagues. He wasn't alone in his struggle. Many had faced similar challenges, and his story had given them a voice. He had turned Linda's hatred into something powerful, something that could guide and uplift others. At the end of a long day, Caleb returned to his office, looking over the city with a sense of quiet pride. The fight had been long, painful, and exhausting, but he had come out stronger and more determined than ever. He knew there would be future challenges and new battles to fight, but now he had a community standing with him. Would Caleb's resilience create lasting change within the hospital, inspiring others to stand tall in the face of adversity? As he closed his office door, Caleb felt the weight of his journey settles. He had faced down prejudice, endured the sting of false accusations, and emerged victorious. But more than that, he had turned his pain into purpose, becoming a beacon for others who might walk a similar path. With each day, he would continue his work, knowing that every challenge only made him stronger. And as he stepped out into the cool night, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. Weeks turned into months, and Caleb's story continued to ripple through the hospital. His colleagues' respect for him had grown, not just for his skill as a surgeon, but for his strength as a person. He'd become a mentor, a guide, and an example of what it meant to stand firm in one's values, even in the face of adversity. Could Caleb's journey create a lasting legacy within the hospital, transforming not only his own life, but the lives of those around him? One evening, Dr. Holloway invited Caleb to speak at a staff gathering focused on resilience in healthcare. Though public speaking wasn't his preference, he knew this was an opportunity to share his story openly, to show his colleagues the power of standing tall in the face of injustice. As Caleb took the stage that night, the room fell silent, every pair of eyes on him. He took a deep breath, grounding himself before he began. "I became a doctor because I wanted to help people," he started, his voice steady. "I never imagined that my dedication to that mission would be questioned because of who I am. But this experience taught me that prejudice can be fierce, but so can resilience." He paused, glancing around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had supported him, those who looked up to him. No matter what challenges we face, our integrity and commitment are what define us. It's easy to feel isolated when people judge you for reasons beyond your control. But remember, you're never alone. We stand together, each of us stronger than the hatred or doubts others might throw at us. Would Caleb's words inspire a new wave of unity and support within the hospital community? As he finished, the room erupted in applause, many colleagues rising to their feet in a show of solidarity. Caleb felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of fulfillment that went beyond personal victory. He had taken a painful experience and turned it into a lesson, something that could inspire others. After the speech, several younger doctors and interns approached him, eager to share their own stories of facing bias or doubt. One intern, Emily, recounted an experience in which she'd been dismissed by a patient who questioned her abilities solely because she was a young woman of color. "Dr. Johnson, hearing your story makes me believe I can face my own challenges with strength," Emily said, her eyes shining with newfound confidence. "Thank you for showing us that resilience isn't just about skill, but about character." Caleb nodded, smiling warmly. "You've got what it takes, Emily. And remember, you're never alone in this. Every challenge you overcome only makes you a better doctor and a stronger person." Would Caleb's mentorship inspire a wave of change, making the hospital a place of true inclusivity and strength? In the weeks that followed, Caleb noticed a subtle shift in the hospital. Colleagues treated one another with greater respect and compassion, support systems strengthened, and open conversations about bias and resilience became more common. Caleb's story sparked a conversation that went beyond him, a dialogue that reached into the heart of the hospital's culture. One afternoon, as Caleb reviewed his patients' charts in his office, Dr. Holloway stopped by. She leaned against the doorway, smiling at him. "You know, Caleb, I've never seen morale this high," she said, her tone filled with warmth. "Your story has made a difference here. People feel supported and encouraged, and I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude." Caleb smiled, feeling a wave of humility. "I only did what I thought was right, Karen. I wanted people to know that they're not alone in facing these struggles. But it's all of you, this community, that turned it into something bigger." Could Caleb's influence create lasting, systemic change in the hospital, shaping its culture for generations to come? Dr. Holloway nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I think you've done more than you realize. I see a new sense of unity here, a sense of strength, and I hope you know how much that's because of you." She paused, giving him an encouraging look. "You've not only changed this hospital, Caleb, you've inspired a movement." As she left, Caleb sat in quiet reflection, absorbing the impact of her words. What had started as one of the most painful experiences of his career had transformed into a source of strength for others. He had taken his scars and turned them into lessons, creating a legacy that would reach far beyond his own journey. Would Caleb's resilience echo through the halls of the hospital, inspiring future generations of doctors to rise above their own challenges? As he walked through the hospital that day, Caleb saw it with new eyes, a place not just of healing, but of resilience, community, and purpose. The path hadn't been easy, and he knew there would be challenges ahead. But now, each step felt lighter, strengthened by the support of those around him, and the sense of purpose that filled his heart. When he left the hospital that evening, stepping into the cool night air, he looked up at the city skyline with a quiet, profound peace. He had faced down prejudice, endured a painful journey, and emerged stronger, not just for himself, but for those who would come after him. And as he walked forward, Caleb knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them with unwavering strength. His scars a testament to his resilience, and his purpose clear: to keep healing, keep inspiring, and to stand tall, always. The weeks following Caleb's speech brought fresh energy to the hospital. Staff seemed to work with renewed purpose, and younger doctors found themselves inspired by his story, emboldened to approach their roles with greater courage. Caleb felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't anticipated. He'd not only weathered Linda's accusations, but he'd created a ripple effect, one that inspired resilience and unity. Would Caleb's experience become a lasting foundation of strength, shaping the hospital's future culture? One evening, as he finished his rounds, Caleb was surprised to see Dr. Holloway waiting for him outside the staff lounge. She greeted him with a warm smile and handed him a sealed envelope. "This came for you," she said, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "It's from the medical board. They've seen the way you handled everything, and I think you'll be pleased with what's inside." Curious, Caleb opened the letter, his eyes scanning the words with growing surprise and gratitude. The medical board had not only recognized his handling of Linda's case, but had also offered him a leadership position within a mentorship program designed to support young doctors facing bias and adversity. Dr. Holloway grinned as she watched his expression. "It seems your reputation for resilience has gone beyond these walls, Caleb. This program will give you the chance to help shape the next generation of doctors, to be a source of strength for those who may face challenges." Caleb felt a warmth spread through him. He'd faced his darkest moments and endured hostility and unfair scrutiny, yet here he was, given the opportunity to turn that pain into purpose on an even greater scale. Would Caleb's new role empower him to create change beyond his own hospital, helping shape the future of the medical community? In the days that followed, Caleb embraced his new role with enthusiasm. He began meeting with young doctors, holding open forums, and discussing the realities of navigating biases in healthcare. His story had become a bridge, connecting him to those who faced similar struggles. He shared his journey not only to teach, but to remind them that no matter the challenge, their dedication and integrity would always carry them through. One young resident, Aaron, approached Caleb after a session, his voice trembling slightly. "Dr. Johnson, I just want to thank you. I've dealt with my own struggles here, and there were times I thought about giving up. But hearing your story has shown me that I'm not alone." Caleb placed a reassuring hand on Aaron's shoulder, his voice steady and encouraging. "You have what it takes, Aaron. Remember, challenges like these don't define you, they strengthen you. Keep going, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." Would Caleb's words inspire young doctors like Aaron to persevere? Or would they continue to face the same struggles? As Caleb continued to work with the mentorship program, he began to realize that his impact extended far beyond his own journey. Each session, each story shared, was a reminder that he was building something larger than himself, a community of resilience, strength, and unwavering determination. Back at the hospital, Caleb's influence grew. His colleagues not only respected him as a skilled surgeon, but also admired his role as a leader. He'd become the person people looked to in times of uncertainty, the one who reminded them of their shared mission. One evening, as Caleb walked through the hospital hallways, he paused to take it all in. The laughter of nurses, the quiet determination of doctors, the hum of monitors, and the gentle exchanges between patients and caregivers, each element felt like part of a community he'd helped shape. His journey, painful as it had been, had given rise to something beautiful. A hospital bound, not just by duty, but by unity. Would Caleb's legacy of resilience continue to inspire, creating a new standard for future doctors to carry forward? As he stepped outside into the cool night air, Caleb felt an immense sense of peace. He had faced trials that had tested every ounce of his strength, but he had come through, not just surviving, but thriving. And now he had a purpose that went beyond any single patient, any one case. He had transformed his pain into purpose, his scars into lessons, and his resilience into a legacy. And he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them with the same unshakable strength, carrying forward a vision of unity, compassion, and courage that would inspire others to stand tall, just as he had.